This is the first of 2 lectures regarding the blood. We'll look at various things such as the function of blood. Blood has 3 main functions: transportation, regulation, and protection. Transportation. The blood is used like a highway system through the body. It transports oxygen and nutrients to all the cells of the body. It transports metabolic waste to the lungs and to the kidneys for elimination. It transports hormones from the endocrine organs to the target organs. So there's a lot of transportation going on in the blood. Blood is used for regulation. It regulates body temperature by absorbing heat and distributing heat. It regulates normal pH using buffers of acid-base buffers throughout the body system. It maintains adequate fluid volume in the circulatory system. And protective functions: blood protects against blood loss through the use of plasma proteins and platelets, which initiate clot formation. It has a function of protection for preventing infection through antibodies, white blood cells, complement proteins. All this are flowing through the blood and act to help protect the body against invaders. Blood is a connective tissue. You might recall that from chapter 4 in the histology section. Blood is a connective tissue. It's a liquid connective tissue. It has a fluid matrix called plasma. The blood cells that are suspended in the plasma are one of 3 forms. There's erythrocytes, or red blood cells; leukocytes, or white blood cells; and platelets, which are portions of cells that are used for the clotting mechanisms. If you withdraw blood and place it in a tube and then centrifuge that tube, which is centrifuge just spinning the tube, which separates the components of blood. You separate the red blood cells from the plasma, and it separates into 3 sections. The plasma is the least dense, so that's going to be towards the top of the test tube. The middle portion is called the buffy coat, and that's leukocyte, white blood cells, and platelets. And the erythrocytes is the most dense compartment, and it's the lowest, furthest down in the tube, and that's composed of erythrocytes, or red blood cells. The percentage of the blood volume that's red blood cells is also called the hematocrit. Normal for males is about 47%, give or take 5%, and for females is 42%, give or take 5%. Blood plasma is sticky, it's straw-colored, it's 90% water. It contains nutrients such as amino acids, fatty acids, cholesterol, vitamins, glucose. It has respiratory gases of oxygen, carbon dioxide. Hormones are dissolved in the blood plasma. Waste from metabolism of proteins is dissolved in the blood plasma. Electrolytes are found in the blood plasma, and plasma proteins are found in the blood plasma. So the plasma there's a lot of components and a lot of structures that are floating around and are dissolved in the blood plasma. The plasma proteins are the 3 main groupings of proteins. There's albumin is about 60% of the plasma protein, and it's a carrier protein. It functions as a substance carrier. Substance can bind to albumin and it can be carried throughout the blood system. Albumin is a major contributor of plasma osmotic pressure. Osmotic pressure is the pressure that is like a blood pressure that's the result of the components within the blood, like sodium and potassium and the different factors that contribute to osmotic pressure. Globulins are antibodies that release an immune response, and these are found in the blood plasma. There's alpha and beta globulins and gamma globulins. Fibrinogen is also plasma in the blood. It's formed by the liver, and it comes into play when there's blood clotting. It helps to clot and stop bleeding from a tear in the blood vessel. The formed elements of blood are basically the cells of the blood. As we discussed earlier, these red blood cells called erythrocytes. The major role of erythrocytes are to carry oxygen and carbon dioxide. White blood cells are leukocytes. This major role is defense from disease. And platelets are the third formed elements of blood. This major role is for blood clotting. Of all these formed elements, only the white blood cells are complete cells. Red blood cells do not have a nucleus or other organelles. Platelets are just cell fragments. So the only complete cells in the blood are the white blood cells. Most of the blood cells originate from the bone marrow from hemocytoblast. This produces the erythrocytes, the leukocytes, and the plasma and the platelet cells. Here's a microscopic sample of blood showing the different white blood cells and the red blood cells and platelets. We'll look at the structure of erythrocytes or red blood cells first. First of all, it's a biconcave shape. I mean, it's concave on both sides. It's concave on the upper side, and on the lower side it's concave. It's about 97% hemoglobin, not counting the water. There's no mitochondria, so the cellular metabolism is anaerobic because they don't consume oxygen. That way they transport oxygen, but they don't consume oxygen. That leaves more oxygen available for transportation throughout the body, and so that the cells themselves don't use oxygen. They're anaerobic, so they use non-oxygen forms of energy. Red blood cells are dedicated to transporting respiratory gases of oxygen and carbon dioxide. Hemoglobin is a protein that makes the red blood cells red, and it reversibly binds oxygen. Reversibly means it can bind oxygen, but then in cases of when the oxygen level is low in the surrounding cells, oxygen is released from the hemoglobin and can be released from the hemoglobin and go into the cells that have low oxygen amounts. The structure of hemoglobin. There's two alpha and two beta polypeptide chains and 4 heme groups. The heme groups contain iron, so there's 4 molecules of iron within the hemoglobin, and this basically forms the structure of hemoglobin. Remember there's 4 iron molecules in the hemoglobin. So the globin is 2 polypeptide chains. Polypeptides are basically just means protein. 2 protein chains. There's 2 alpha chains, 2 beta chains. The heme pigment is bonded to each of the globin chain. It's what gives the blood its red color. There's a central iron atom in the heme which binds 1 oxygen molecule, or 1 O2, two molecules of oxygen, O2. Each hemoglobin molecule can transport 4 molecules of oxygen. Each red blood cell contains about 250 million hemoglobin molecules. So each red blood cell can transport about 1 billion oxygen molecules. Hematopoiesis is the process of blood cell formation, and it occurs in the red bone marrow of the long bones. This is where red blood cells, or white blood cells, and platelets are all these are produced by hematopoietic stem cells, which are located in the bone marrow. This slide basically says the same thing. Hematopoietic stem cells give rise to all formed elements of red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Erythropoiesis is the production of red blood cells. It's regulated. Too few red blood cells leads to hypoxia in the tissue. Too many red blood cells increases the blood viscosity, making the blood thicker. There's a balance between red blood cell production and red blood cell destruction, and that depends on hormone controls and also adequate supplies of iron, amino acids, folic acid, and vitamin B, which are all needed to produce the hemoglobin in the red blood cells. There's a hormone that's released by the kidneys in results of hypoxia called erythropoietin, And erythropoietin is a direct stimulus for erythropoiesis. So if the tissues are hypoxic and they need more oxygen, it stimulates the production of red blood cells to carry more oxygen to the tissues. This is the stages from a stem cell, the hematopoietic stem cell, to the final product of erythrocyte. Notice that the next step before it is a mature erythrocyte is a reticulocyte. That's an immature form of the red blood cell, reticulocyte. Oxygen deficiency is hypoxia. There's different causes of hypoxia. It can either come from decreased red blood cell numbers due to hemorrhage or increased destruction. It can be hypoxia due to insufficient hemoglobin per red blood cell, such as iron deficiency, or it could be reduced availability of oxygen, such as in high altitudes. So each of these can result in hypoxia. This just shows that the mechanism for regulating red blood cell is under the negative feedback control. Hypoxia is stimulus. Here is stimulus. It is inadequate oxygen delivery due to hypoxia, which is going to cause the kidney to release erythropoietin. Erythropoietin stimulates red blood cell growth from the bone marrow. It's going to increase red blood cell count, which is going to increase the oxygen capability of the blood. And so there's more oxygen going to be carried to the blood, which is going to counteract the hypoxia that started this effect. Anemia is when blood is abnormally low. It's when the blood has abnormally low oxygen carrying capability. This is a sign rather than the disease itself. Anemia is also accompanied by fatigue, pallor, shortness of breath, and chills. Three causes of anemia. Three main causes is either blood loss, low production of red blood cells, or high destruction of red blood cells. In blood loss, you see this in chronic hemorrhagic anemia or hemorrhagic anemia, such as blood loss from a stab or from a wound. This is treated by blood replacement. Chronic hemorrhagic anemia, you see that with a chronic source of bleeding, like from hemorrhoids or bleeding ulcers. Low red blood cell production can be produced by iron deficiency. Remember, iron is needed for the hemoglobin, so if there's deficiency of iron, you're not going to have the hemoglobin. The hemoglobin is going to be low, and it has decreased oxygen carrying capabilities because of the low hemoglobin. This results in a microcytic or small red blood cell type of anemia, and the treatment is iron supplements. There's also a type of anemia called pernicious anemia, which is due to an autoimmune disease that destroys the stomach mucosa. The stomach, in a normal situation, the stomach secretes a protein called intrinsic factor, which is needed to absorb vitamin B12. Deficiency of vitamin B12 results in anemia. And this is a macrocytic anemia, which is made of large red blood cells. The treatment for this is treat with B12 injections or nasal B12 swabs. Can also be the result of low dietary B12, which is seen in vegetarian diets. There's renal anemia, which is the result of lack of erythropoietin, and this is seen in the context of renal disease or kidney disease. It's treated with synthetic erythropoietin. Aplastic anemia is destruction of red blood cell marrow destruction of red marrow by drugs, radiation, viruses, chemicals. Often the cause is unknown, and this affects all types of cells, both red blood cells, white blood cells, and the platelets. Hemolytic anemias are result of premature red blood cell lysis or destruction. This is called by hemoglobin abnormalities, incompatible blood transfusions or infections. Sickle cell anemia is one example of a hemolytic anemia. This is a slide of sickle cell anemia. Notice how some of the cells have sharp edges, sickle cell shaped instead of round. This would be a normal cell. This would be a sickle cell.